Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Gwen Walker McQuirby, the president of the Commonwealth Virginia chapter of the Links Incorporated. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome you to our Health and Human Services Facet virtual event entitled Detection is Protection, a Breast Cancer Awareness Forum. I am grateful that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. We have a distinguished panel of medical professionals who will present the latest information in breast cancer. You will also hear the breast cancer journeys of 3 survivors, including myself. For those who may not be familiar with who we are, the Links Incorporated, established nearly 75 years ago, is one of the nation's oldest and largest volunteer service organizations of women who are committed to enriching, sustaining, and ensuring the cultural and economic survival of African Americans and other persons of African ancestry. Once again, I say welcome. I hope you will enjoy this virtual forum and benefit from the learning opportunities provided by our expert panelists. And now, Dr. Lornell Tompkins will introduce our moderator, Rudene Mercer Haynes. Thank you.
Dr. Tompkins, you're muted.
If you're still on mute.
Thank you, I'm sorry. Good evening. I have the honor of introducing our moderator for tonight's presentation. She is Ms. Rudene Mercer Haynes, who is a partner in the Structured Finance and Securitization practice at Hunter Andrews Kurth LLP. Amongst her many responsibilities and activities, she advocates for diversity and inclusion issues. Outside of her legal practice, Rudene is passionate about ending health disparities and racial inequities. She is a member of the VCU Massey Cancer Center Advisory Board and a member of Sister Fund, Richmond's Black Women Giving Circle, managed by the Community Foundation, dedicated to investing in nonprofits and community-based organizations, contributing to the education, empowerment, and leadership of Black women and girls in the greater Richmond area. Rudene, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Robert Winn, who's the director of the VCU Massey Cancer Center. He's been in that post since December of 2019. I met Dr. Winn shortly after he started through a work colleague who served on the board for VCU Massey Cancer Center. Knowing about my passion regarding diversity and equity, she mentioned to me that at the time Dr. Winn assumed his post, he was the only African-American director of a National Cancer Institute designated cancer center. This, my friends, was a really, really big deal. Recognizing how cancer is often seen as a taboo topic in Black communities, I wanted to meet this guy and to do whatever I could to introduce him to Black community leaders, and in particular, Black faith leaders. Out of these introductions, meetings of a doctor, a pastor, and a lawyer, Dr. Winn, along with Pastor F. Todd Gray of Fifth Street Baptist Church, and I co-founded the Facts and Faith Friday calls, which started during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our solitary goal was to address directly the misinformation and confusion that existed about how COVID-19 was transmitted. And we wanted to talk about affirmative steps that could be taken to reduce the risk of transmission. Most recently, we've been fortunate to arm Black faith communities with information, important information about the efficacy and effectiveness of vaccines. When I first met Dr. Winn, I was absolutely struck by how down to earth and personable he was. And I would tell everybody that I talked to about him that he's the coolest, like, researcher, doctor, scientist type that I'd ever come across. Because who could drop lyrics of Wu-Tang Clan and this, excuse me, I said that wrong, Wu-Tang Clan, I'm losing my street cred, in the same breath that he's talking about cancer health disparities among people of color. I've enjoyed working with Dr. Winn on so many different levels, as a fellow equity advocate and as a catalyst for change. But the thing I most cherish about my friendship with Dr. Winn is that, my friendship. I want to thank you personally for joining us this evening for this very important webinar. While I could take up the balance of tonight's program, reciting the various awards and accolades that Dr. Winn has received, I will only share one of his awards because I feel like it's emblematic of who he is as a person and as a doctor. Later this month, Dr. Winn will be honored as the recipient of the inaugural Association of American Cancer Institute's Cancer Health Equity Award. This award recognizes Dr. Winn for his passionate commitment to improving health care and health equity and his significant positive impact on cancer care in Virginia. Driven by the belief that community engagement is a central component of population health management, Dr. Winn promotes services that reflect the unique needs and values of the population that he serves. Congratulations, Dr. Winn, on this amazing honor. And with that, I'll turn the program over to you.
I think that I like to start off by sort of saying, you know, Rudene, that could have been said in reverse for you. You are amazing. I will say that I've known about the links for an incredibly long time, and Sisters Network and many other groups that are together that are here in the Commonwealth. And I would always sort of say that when we talk about excellence, you mirror that. You all mirror that every single day. I was saying that I am very grateful to be welcomed into this community because you did it when you didn't have to, but thank goodness you did. And so I will do my best to reflect the best effort possible to represent you the best way I know how, because it matters. Some of y'all know that my grandmother was from here. So Hannah Darden, that's her name, Hannah Lee Darden, to get it right. You know, when I took this job, I think she cried, not only for me, but she cried because she said, you know, the place I grew up in, the place I was born in, maybe it's actually on track to do something good. And so it's not lost on me that this isn't just about me being a cancer center director. It's certainly bigger. Two dreams I want to eradicate. I definitely want to eradicate cancer from the globe and from the face of the planet. At least at a minimum, get it down to where it's a little itty bitty C and not a big C. But the other thing is I want to eradicate disparities and unapologetic about it. I want to eradicate inequities, inequalities wherever I see them and unapologetic about it. I think having these positions allow us to do that. So I don't know that there is if it's queued up and ready to go, then we can actually do that. Otherwise, you know, Sister Rudene, I'm coming ready with slides and freestyle if necessary. But if you all got something queued up and ready to go that I've actually pre-recorded, we'll show that.
Is it just me or can you not hear sound?
I can't hear sound. So you know what? Why don't we just stop that? I'm gonna hit this up live. Let's get it done. We're gonna do this. Oh yeah, we're gonna do this. Y'all ready? So let me share some slides with you. These are slides that I think are incredibly important in the context of what I believe is the next fight. So I am going to share my screen in 2 seconds. I'm sorry that the technical issues didn't go, but this is where, you know, growing up in neighborhoods that I grew up in, you know, my mom had me when she was 15 and, you know, kept me out of trouble. my grandmother, my mother kept me out of trouble for real. But one of the things they allowed me to do, which I really enjoyed over time, which was to be able to, back in the day, the hip hop thing, and share lyrics. My grandfather busted all my dreams about the hip hop thing. He's like, that's nothing but trading eights. So I don't know what y'all, he would always go, I'm like, I don't know what no trading eights is. But anyways, we gonna do this right now. And in fact, I got a half an hour, right? 20 minutes, what I got?
You have half an hour.
All right, we're gonna do this now. All right, let's do this. So let's go back. Why cancer centers so important? Cancer centers are important because as we were reaching the 1950s and 60s, it was clear that many people were dying from cancers and much of us in the country didn't know what to do. 1971, something really big happened. 1971, President Nixon, and let it be known that it wasn't just President Nixon. So let's get it straight. The guy over his right shoulder is Ted Kennedy. So between Ted Kennedy and Nixon, they got together to do something that was bold and brash. They brought people together. In fact, in 1971, we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary in 2020, in December 2021. These folk got together around the table and says, listen, if I bring together the government, the NIH, National Institute of Health, with academic centers like Massey, I believe that we'll be able to cure cancer. Now, they were fairly naive. They thought they could do this in 10 years. Now, look, they ain't doing it in no 10 years, but the big, bold experiment was to bring the best and the most talented folk together. Now, look, 50 years ago, what you don't see in that picture are a couple things. You don't see nobody of color in that picture. You don't see any women in that picture. And you don't even see any people that would do public health in that picture. So my call in the framework of what I'm going to talk to you today, and particularly around breast cancer, is let's not just have cancer centers. What and how can you as an organization push cancer centers, particularly VCU Massey, which was designated, by the way, in 1974, how can you push us to reimagine what new cancer centers can look like over the next 50 years? Now, 50 years ago, all they could think about is we don't understand cancer. So what they were thinking about it was just the biology of cancer. So they were focused everything on research about DNA, because that's all they had. In retrospect, now we look at that as bare-skinned and sharp knives, but we had to start somewhere. I say that because this is equally important. And now I got to be honest with you. Let me just, for the record, let you know that my grandfather was definitely down with MLK, no doubt about it. But he was a Ralph Abernathy fan. Now, apparently he may have met Reverend Abernathy somewhere, and he was a Reverend Abernathy fan. I want to tell you that at the same time this big dream was happening about curing cancer, we were also putting men on the moon. This is a picture of Reverend Abernathy on the eve of the Apollo 11 moon launch that landed the first man on the moon. And it was Reverend Abernathy and his crew that knocked on the doors of NASA and says, listen, we just want to talk to you about one thing, just one thing. We want to talk to you about why is it that you can put a man on the moon, but it seems like you can't do a doggone thing about the issues right here on this planet and right here in the United States. And by the way, in your backyard, even here in Florida. Deputy Payne at the time, who was representing NASA, said, Reverend Abernathy, let me just tell you that it's easier to put a man on the moon than it is to tackle these social issues in the United States. Come on now. So let it be known that this talk and my acceptance of becoming a cancer center director, and I'm talking to you different than any other cancer center director because you can get the numbers from anywhere. But this cancer center has been set up to be unapologetic about saying that we should be putting a man on the moon, we should be curing cancer, and we should also be paying attention to those people who are most negatively impacted by this disease. I'm absolutely unapologetic about that. And to be quite honest with you, it turns out that there is even more research to be done than just the biology, because it turns out that where you live matters. Now, listen, I am not going to lie to you that everything I do with this cancer center, I live and I breathe. You can blame my grandmother, my grandfather, and my mom. And some of y'all even met my auntie. You can blame them, but I cannot leave alone the fact that science in and of itself, while wonderful, still is limited if it doesn't address the issues around social justice. I don't fool myself that I became a doctor just to say, well, I become a doctor and I got great medicine, I got great surgery. Well, that great medicine, great surgery only works if you get to me. This is why I've changed the whole concept of the bench to bedside to say, that's great, but usually if you can't get to my bedside, I can't do nothing. Let's stop that silliness and start talking about, why don't we talk about the community as being a community-centric, community-forward, face-forwarding cancer center? Why don't we talk about something different about, why don't we call it people power to the pipette? So that over time, we're collecting information about our community so that we're influencing and even defining in some cases the type of research that that's getting done here at VCU Massey. Now look, for the record, let me just square some things up so you know what an NCI designated cancer center is, so that we all talk the same language. There are over 5,000 cancer centers in the United States. You know, Cancer Centers of America, you got a whole bunch of other cancer centers, but there's only 71, that's 71, that have been deputized by the federal government as a partner. You're blessed to have 2 in the state of Virginia. VCU Massey, which was the first to be designated in the Virginia, and UVA. Why do I say this? Because when I talk to most groups don't understand that. Why would you come to an NCI designated cancer center? Number one, you'd come there because the truth of the matter is that's where the cutting edge science is actually happening, which leads to the cutting edge therapies of not just today, but tomorrow. Now, the truth of the matter is, it pains me to know that some of the discoveries that we're making, in some cases, are even life-saving, but that only some will benefit, but not all. And some of the not all are only 10 or 6 to 10 blocks away, right from where I practice. This noise has to stop for me. And you know, Rudene is getting, I know Rudene, don't worry. I know the spirit moving me, but I know 30 minutes. I'm gonna keep it up in 30 minutes. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do that. And we're gonna talk about breast cancer too. Now look, let's start talking real talk. So that we can start talking the same language that you get to hear out in the community or in the academic circles. Because I don't believe all in this stuff that there's an academic in the community. The truth of the matter is I'm still that 15, you know, that son of that 15-year-old mom. I understand. I am the product of someone who actually was doing the busing, forced busing as they called it. And understand that my role here is to not to build barriers or firewalls, but to break them down. So let me talk about disparities for a second with y'all so that we up on the same language, because you're gonna hear these words termed and, you know, coming around. Health differences are differences in outcomes between two groups based on specific characteristics. Health disparities, now hear me out on this, while not all differences are disparities, health disparities is concerned with primarily social justice. And when we talk about health equity, because that's become a phrase, that's a thing now, right? We want to talk about health equity. We don't want to talk about disparities. But health equity is a principle and an underlying commitment to reduce and ultimately eliminate disparities in health and its determinants. But come on, y'all, how you gonna get to that pie in the sky thing without dealing with the fact that we still got disparities? I decided I ain't let nobody up off the hook on this one. The truth of the matter is it's too important of a topic. This cancer center is based on the following example, that where you live matters. Now, hold on. Somebody's saying, well, wait a minute. Well, how you know, Dr. Winn, that blacks are more, predisposed to disease, and you know we got more comorbid diseases. The only time I ever disagreed with Fauci and had to email him is for the foolishness of talking about just because my skin color, I'm more predisposed to diabetes, more predisposed to hypertension, without understanding that the structures that were put in place disadvantage numbers of populations, including as we talk about breast cancer. Now we're going to talk about the fact of the matter is, if you have an issue with breast cancer, I'm going to tell you a little secret before I get into this case. You can come to us early. Now, look, I've been around the community a little bit, and people say, well, listen, Dr. Winn, I don't want to be going to your Massey Cancer Center. People only go there when it's too late. I said, you don't need to go there when it's too late. We now have programs for early surveillance, for screening, for prevention. And so let's stop this foolishness that we only go to doctors when something's terrible. Now, the wonderful part about this, if I were talking to a group of African-American men, there'd be more than enough truth. In fact, our people see their head going all down like, oh yeah, no, well, I don't, well, that lump on my neck, well, it's been there for about a year and a half. In most cases, I don't have that issue to deal with in this community, but I will say that there's better use of use. So let's get down to this case, because I'm gonna prove to you that place and space matter. If you have two sisters, they're raised in the same town, they come from the same home, under the same circumstances, and as all kids, they do what? They grow up. Well, these two sisters grew up. One wound up finishing college, migrating then to the Gold Coast, which is a wonderful part of Chicago, very affluent. This is where Oprah Winfrey hangs out. Lakefront gyms, farmer markets, top universities. The second sister, for whatever reason, doesn't graduate from college. She graduated from high school. She kind of found her way through life. She lives in a place called Moline. Now, all I can tell you about Moline, put it this way, it ain't no Chicago. You got stress, you have poverty. You ain't got no farmer market and no Moline. I've been there. That whole area right around Rock Island, Moline, let me just clear it up. There is not a whole lot of anything going on in Moline, okay? And I'm about to finish up here, so I'm gonna get this quick. So y'all, I might need to chat. Somebody tell me when I'm getting close to that 10-minute mark or something like that. If they both develop cancer, will the treatment be the same? Wait a minute now. In the 1970s, we'd have argued that they're sisters. They're made of both the genetic code. The DNA is the same. So of course they'll be treated the same. Not so fast. This is why this is an important conversation for us tonight. Don't let anybody tell you that the reality is that what you eat isn't important to your overall outcome. We know that your microbiome, that is the bacteria in your gut, actually does have an impact on your DNA. And that what foods you have access to and you're exposed to can positively or negatively impact your DNA, meaning that it can impact your outcome. By the way, stress matters. I'll say that again. What my grandmother said is that, boy, you better, the best way you're gonna get sick is you get all stressed. Turns out grandma was right. We got a fancier term for that called epigenetics, meaning that if you have, stresses that actually really can, like, for example, we can get into Beyonce and Serena Williams, who had all those difficulties with their pregnancy. The reality is it's not even the stress they're going under. It's the stresses that came before that can negatively impact their outcome. So why is this important? Yeah, we've done a good job in reducing disparities between Black and white. But it turns out that when it comes to breast cancer for women, and I can point to other things, that when you come to Black-white differences, it's not better. Overall, we certainly have, since the 1990s, made better improvements in reducing the Black-white gap of deaths. But there are still pockets that we have to do some work in. And breast cancer is one of them. Now, you might be saying, why is that? Is there something with us? Maybe, being a Black woman, there's something inherently about, I'm all right. Now, hold on now. I'm gonna tell you that it ain't really got it's some to do with biology, but a lot to do with your ZNA, your zip code and neighborhood association. Now, look here. That's like saying that if you took and you're looking at breast cancer, we know that since 1988, death rates from breast cancers have definitely improved across the entire country, except for if you happen to be from West Virginia, Alabama, Mississippi. And you look at the improvements of outcomes in New York and Minnesota, you're gonna tell me that that's all has to do with somebody's skin color? I don't buy it. So what it means, and I'm gonna get through these next couple slides. When we actually come up with, this is why I want you to know what an NCI designated cancer center does and when you can get referral. The reality is people say, well, when can I come to Massey? When you want to. Here's the issue. When we talk about why we may have seen disparities in Black-white differences in women with breast cancer, turns out some of that is us, meaning the medical field. Turns out that when we first came up with the screening and treatments for breast cancer and things like colorectal cancer, they were unequally distributed. So in the early days, when you could sort of see, well, the 1930s, 40s, and 1950s, Black and white women, kind of died along the same. But what happened? What happened was, as we create scientific progress, we inadvertently also introduce disparities. I want you to know this because when we have now precision medicine and immunotherapy and those things that are actually happening right at Massey, we want to make sure that not some people have access to that, but that all people have access to that. So we don't have to talk about things with the immunotherapy. Now, look, this is something I found great. When you looked at just 5,000 oncologists, just took 5,000 oncologists, you didn't ask them how they did between Black and white patients. You asked them, well, as a group, how do you think oncologists across the country, is there a difference between Black and their white patients in the health outcomes? 62% says, well, yeah. How? They believe, not them. They say, well, not me. When it comes to me, I take care of my Black and white patients all the same. It's no difference. It's no difference. But as a group, even the oncologists believe that 62% of the people of color had a worse outcome. And almost 40% received a different kind of medical care. And that almost 40% had poorer communications when it was actually with people of color. Now, listen, let's just talk real up in here. This is data that's coming from the NCCN and ACS, if anybody wants to care. So COVID did us a favor. COVID just said, listen, this is what's happening. We know with COVID that there was racism. We know that things like Amy Cooper happened. We know that there were doctors who unfortunately said crazy things like physicians can't be racist, because all this talk about structural racism simply just made white people uncomfortable and alienated white doctors. Blind spots. We also know from COVID that this is one of the things that I stand on, proud to stand on at VCU, that for years we've talked about all of these downstream factors, all the molecular this, that, and the other thing, and forgot to talk about all the other things that can impact your DNA, your ZNA. Now, let me get to that for a quick second. I'll just use this as a quick second and I'll be done. I'm gonna wrap up here pretty soon, y'all. I am, because I know I'm gonna wrap up. Now, I think I got maybe about 10 minutes. I'm gonna wrap up.
10 minutes, sir, you're good.
All right, I'm gonna wrap up now. Now, look, if you look, and this is the same thing for us, so I'm gonna just put this out there. If you live in Chicago, you live in this well-to-do area, I talked about the Gold Coast, life expectancy 85, you go 4.5 miles west, it drops down by 16 years of life expectancy. This is data that we got from Steve Wolf here at VCU. You go 8.5 miles south of the loop, and you now reduce life expectancy by 30 years. Now, look, I know some of y'all are sort of saying, yeah, okay, Rob, Dr. Winn, I got it. But there's a level bunch of violence up and it's just like East, there's a whole bunch of violence. And that's what's causing it. When they evaluated it for that, it was negligible. Now, you can make the case that, well, African-Americans tend to live in those areas. Therefore, this is what we have. But let me just tell you that what we have here is not unique in the United States. We now are seeing rich and poor increasingly segregated in Paris. We see even in places like England, which has a health system and all the rest of the stuff, that the poorest areas are left far behind with lack of social infrastructure. So let's stop playing about these disparities as if we've just discovered them. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the greatest social scientists ever, not only for his time, but even now, wrote about this same inequities since 1899. So don't pretend like health disparities are just new on the scene. Why do I say this? Because I also want to make sure that you know that many of the things that we have experienced ultimately have been here for a very long time. Now listen, this is the fun part, and I'm gonna end right here. And I'm gonna come back to the last end of this case. So I'm gonna tell you why place and space matter. Listen, this is a picture of Richmond, 1935. This was federal mandate, federal sanctioned segregation. So as you know, with redlining, called the Federal Housing Act of 1930, that FDR Act, the big deal, the New Deal, never included Blacks, domestic workers, or farmers, right? This is an example of where on the east end of town, if you were African-American, you could buy a house in the red or the yellow, but you could not buy a house on that west end in the blue or green. Just didn't happen. So segregation happened. That's okay, because even despite segregation, communities thrived. You had up at Jackson Ward what folks call the Harlem of the South or the Black Wall Street. You had banks, you had robust communities, but so everyone talks about, oh, well, redlining really did the damage of America, at Black America. Stop the foolishness. It wasn't really redlining. That's definitely segregated living, which was not good, but here is what happened. In the 1950s, some of you may not remember, but this is where we had America's growth of interstates. Well, interesting enough, those interstates were deliberately, in some cases, designed to destroy African-American communities. Now, hear me out on structure now. I know everybody wants to talk about African-Americans just having hypertension and diabetes and all the rest of that stuff just because we're born that way. Hold up. Now, let me tell you, as a result of this urban renewal thing, otherwise known as building white roads through Black neighborhoods, we decimated. And some of y'all know, that's why, what happened up in in Jackson, and what's happening in Gilchrist. So what happened? Not only were these highways then dividing and destroying some of these communities, but guess what? There were plants and businesses put that we knew caused more pollution in the air. How's that work? Well, turns out that a friend of mine, who's a very good researcher, by the way, Christopher Tessum, I love that guy. That guy is awesome. He really studies what happens in the ambient air around communities and found that particulate matter 2.5 was disproportionately and systemically affecting people of color. Why is that important? It's important because those particulate matters also are associated with cancer. So look here. This is just a picture of the West End and the East End. Now, I don't know about you, but I could tell a difference of looking at communities up in the East End versus the West End. And one of the things that this is important for, it's not just they got trees. The lack of trees, the lack of vegetation also caused what we consider to be urban heat islands. And these urban heat islands tend to actually happen in the hottest areas, tend to be the poorest areas to live in. Now, you say, so what? But global warming, who cares? Turns out these urban heat islands are also contributing to chronic disease. So I want to stop all this talk about there's something inherently wrong or something in our biology as African-American women that just predisposes us to breast cancer more frequently than other things, and stop the madness and said there may be some truth to that. But the question is, what is happening in your place in space? What was the structure that allowed these current living of what we could call hashtag social determinants of health that disadvantage us? And by the way, many of us say, well, listen, Dr. Winn, that was cool, but I used to live up in Gilpin, but I'm out. That's what I used to say. I'd be like, I lived in the hood, but I'm out. I'm wearing a blue blazer right now. Turns out, doesn't matter, because whatever was happening at that time is still imprinted on your DNA. This is why you have people like Beyonce and people like Serena Williams, which have no real reason to have difficult pregnancy, having difficult pregnancy. Stop playing. It's not just because they happen to be women of color. The situation in which they grew up in, and even the generations before, the ZNA, that zip code and neighborhood of association, impacts them to this day. This is an important conversation because people don't tell you about 1 in 8 women this and 1 in 8. Listen, and you're going to hear all that from the experts. I'm here to tell you that this cancer center, though, is doing something different because I recognize that if I only focused on your biology, I'd only be focusing on half the story. This is why I need you all as partners. I think I got 3 minutes. Turns out that many of the efforts we try to do in the past, so this is on the west and south side of Chicago. You have the greatest number of deaths on the south side and the west side of Chicago. And so, good meaning people said, well, we're going to eradicate that. We're going to address that by having these breast imaging centers of excellence. My daughter, who was still in middle school at the time, said, Dad, I don't get it. If you're trying to address all the issues in the worst parts of the city, then why are all the pink ribbons not in the pink? Right? It's like the guy, Willie Sutton, who said, well, why you rob banks? Well, that's where the money at. Frequently, many of our activities are near, but not where the money is, not where the need is. I want to change that. So, the issue is, I got it. We come up with a whole bunch of new technologies, but I ain't trying to hear that noise. And this I ain't trying to do either. Now, look, I'm picking on Cleveland Clinic because we ain't doing this at VCU. I'm picking on the Cleveland Clinic, y'all. It says the Cleveland Clinic grows healthy while its neighbors do what? Remain mired in poverty. Ain't trying to hear that. This cancer center is actually also trying to not only cure cancer, but as others would know, I'm trying to provide hopefully job opportunities so that we don't take and extract things from our community, but we're building things within them. So listen, I am convinced that we are on the right track. I'm going to go through this slide and just say that, we talk about genomics, phenomics all day, but there's some other omics called the community omics that I'm going to need y'all to help me understand what we're missing in the communities so we can address that. So I want to end with this. I know everybody's out there now trying to build trust. Everybody trying to build trust. Been trying to build trust for the last 30 years. Got academics. But you know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to actually institute a national institutional trustworthiness scale. How the heck you gonna build trust if you ain't even trustworthy? How you gonna know if you're trustworthy if you ain't even paying any attention? So right here at VCU, we're doing something that's big. We do local actions for national. We are now leading the country and saying, why don't we have institutional trustworthiness scales? And by the way, let us show you how to actually create that. In addition, these are my people over here. I would say Wu-Tang all day, but you know what I'm saying. These are my people who invited me, embraced me, and actually put me on the right track of saying, Dr. Winn, if you're going to interact with the community, you just can't come in and have some event and then show up later and then be gone. Or you can't just have a grant, and when the grant runs out, then you gone. We need you to be relevant and accessible beyond this Zoom. My goal is to make this cancer center for the people. Lincoln once said it best when he created a university. He said, I'm not creating public universities because it's the public universities. It is the public's university. This is the public's cancer center. And I want to work with you in trying to figure that out. So we got a lot of things that we're trying to do. One of the things that we can do is be working with you all, the links, and trying to figure out how we can do a better job with transportation. Because it turns out that over 4 million people last year didn't get any care because they just couldn't get a ride. I may not be able to do something about your housing. I certainly may not be able to do something about your food insecurity, but you can't convince me that NCI federally designated cancer centers working with partners within the community can't do something about transportation. That's where this cancer center is going. So that may not sound all sexy, but it's not an or for me, it's an and. We are creating the new drugs of tomorrow. In fact, we got 2 drugs that looks like they will get out in the phase 1 clinical trials, or at least nearing in that process. But I also want to make sure that coming from my neighborhood, the truth of the matter is science, even the scientific miracles, are limited if we don't have trust and if we're not connected to the community. So again, I end with this. You have 2 sisters. They both developed breast cancer. Will they be treated the same? I don't know. Based on the structures they grew up in, based on the fact, and we know trust now matters, transportation, and other thing is, I'm gonna say telehealth. How you gonna get some health out in Brunswick or someone when you ain't even got no broadband? So let's stop playing that just because we have the latest and greatest drug that is gonna change the world. It only changes the world if it's accessible to all. That's what this cancer center is trying to do. And for me to stay on the straight and narrow and not be the shortest tenured cancer center director of all time at Massey, I'm gonna need your help and your prayers. So with that, I'm gonna end, and I hope I did. I stayed within my half an hour, at least near that half an hour. So I'm gonna stop there.
Well, I don't know about the rest of these folks, but I'm so happy the technology did not work, because I wanted you to freestyle and you did, and thank you. From time to time, I mistakenly call you pastor, but you preached today, sir. You preached today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are going to transition, but before I officially sort of take on my duties as moderator, I really want to take another moment to applaud the Commonwealth Virginia chapter of the Links Incorporated, the Sisters Network Central Virginia, and VCU Massey Cancer Center for raising awareness regarding breast cancer among women of color and encouraging an open dialogue about what can be done to diagnose early and improve the outcomes of those diagnosed. For many people, cancer is a taboo topic that folks just don't want to talk about. This was true of me and my family, even though my mother and grandmother were both breast cancer survivors. In the interest of full disclosure, I need to share a little something about myself. While I serve on the board of VCU Massey Cancer Center, I'm also a patient at VCU Massey Cancer Center. I was diagnosed with breast cancer on November 30th, 2020. I'm stage 1A, which is an early stage breast cancer. I'm triple positive. And for some of you who are sort of scratching your head saying, well, what does that mean? We're going to explain in a few minutes. I've undergone a lumpectomy. I've had 12 weekly sessions of chemotherapy. I've had 4 weeks of radiation. I'm on a targeted therapy until probably February of 2022. I'm sharing all of this information, and some of you might be thinking, man, this is a whole lot of information she's sharing. But the reason why I'm doing this is before my diagnosis, I literally and figuratively ran from cancer. But after my diagnosis, I decided that I was going to use my story, all of my story, the good, the bad, the questionable, to encourage Black and brown women to be hypervigilant about their breast health. So I am truly thankful for the organizers in extending the invitation for me to participate this evening. And now I need to get to work. I'm so excited to have this great panel of doctors with us tonight. And I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves, to tell you who they are. And I've also asked them to share with you all what immediately comes to their minds when they hear the word cancer. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Winn.
Yeah. So for me, and the wonderful thing about cancer is that when I started my career, it was learning how to give the compassionate talk about what we couldn't do. I'm now going from talking about what we couldn't do to what is possible. In my lifetime, I've gone from having women with advanced stage breast cancer, not just, giving the pep talk about you've had a great life, what is there you need to do? But hey, listen, here's some options of molecular targeted therapy. And in fact, have been honored blessed even by having women who are not just surviving, but thriving even with advanced stage breast cancer. Miracles happen, science happens. Ultimately, it happens because people like Kandace and like Dr. Hong and Dr. Tucker and others are hard at work trying to create miracles every day and make them accessible. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Dr. McGuire?
I'm Dr. Kandace McGuire. I'm the Chief of Breast Surgery here at VCU Massey Cancer Center, a professor of surgery and one of the leaders of the cancer service line. When I think about the word cancer, I had to think about this one for a little while. I think about the word challenge. I think that when I thought about a career in cancer, it challenged me to be, something that I never saw myself as. And every day it challenges me to be better and to find new ways to do things and to reach more people than I reached the day before. And so if I had to come up with one word for cancer, I think it's a double-edged sword, but challenge in a good way, to beat it and to be better every day.
Awesome. Dr. Tucker? You're muted, Dr. Tucker. You're muted.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good evening. I'm Dr. Tiffany Tucker. I'm one of the breast imaging radiologists at VCU and also assistant professor. When I think of cancer, I'm optimistic. I think of cure and hope for the future and really focus on how my role as imager can aid in diagnoses. It's often tough during that diagnosis, but that diagnosis leading to cure for patients. And so I really focus on early detection and kind of being hopeful for the future as that being my key to helping with survival. So optimism and cure and hope for the future.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. And last but not least, Dr. Hong.
Hi, I'm Susan Hong. I'm the Director of Cancer Survivorship at VCU Massey. And for me, when I think of cancer, I actually think of it as a vehicle to promote health equity. So as somebody who does survivorship and as a general internist by training, I look at the whole person and look at how chronic condition to chronic impacts every aspect of their health. And so for me, cancer and the promotion is really the way I can promote health equity, how we can reduce the disparities. And it's not just disparities in cancer screening, but it's also prevention, it's also chronic disease access, because we know that everything impacts an individual and everything impacts their outcome.
Outstanding. So I want that as sort of the backdrop, right? So what you all thought about cancer, because I think that will inform a lot of the responses to my next set of questions. Dr. McGuire and Dr. Winn, this question is for you. Are there any particular risk factors for breast cancer? And I feel silly even asking this question now since we had this great ZNA presentation, but from time to time, you'll hear stories about women who don't have any, history of breast cancer in their family, but yet they have breast cancer. So can you talk a little bit more about some possible risk factors?
So I can start off. I tell a lot of the women who come to my office that the number one and number two risk factors for getting breast cancer are being a woman and getting older. And so really we need to all consider ourselves at risk. When we look at women who are diagnosed with breast cancer, only about 10 to 15% of them actually have a strong family history, and even fewer have a genetic mutation that predisposed them to breast cancer. So I think one of the biggest messages we can get out there is that everybody's at risk and everybody needs to be screened. When we think about some of the things that might predispose us, certainly a strong family history or a genetic reason for getting cancer is one of them. The other things that we can look at are whether we started our periods early. Did we go through menopause late? Did we not have kids until we were in our 30s? Did we breastfeed? Did we take hormone replacement therapy? What's our body weight? How much alcohol do we drink? I just saw an article that popped up, I think on the Slate or something, that was talking about how alcohol is the risk factor that nobody wants to talk about, especially during the pandemic. But those are the ones that I talk to people about, especially the ones that they want to know, how can I prevent this from happening again? But certainly it is not family history alone. And I don't know if I missed any, Dr. Winn, but I'll let you round it up if I forgot something.
Oh, you did. I mean, you did great, and I really do think that I really appreciate the points that you've made, and also that these are tied to behavior. So when we talk about prevention, we always sometimes want to blame people, particularly from neighborhoods. Oh, you have this. Well, you need to be able to have the tools to be able to live healthy and live well. So I think part of my prevention strategy has gone from telling people to eat healthy to ensuring that as a group and as a cancer center director, that we raise the voices that those communities that don't have access to the fresh fruits and exercise, that we also advocate for those communities. That's real cancer prevention.
I couldn't agree more. I do remember when I talked to my radiation oncologist and I told her, like, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I breastfed my kids. And she just looked at me and said, you know what? Sometimes the universe isn't fair. And that's part of it too. But it's enough about me. Dr. Tucker, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Let's talk about detection, and in particular mammograms. I mean, what is the recommended frequency that women should get mammograms?
Yes. Thank you, Rudene. To answer the question, recommended frequency for women of average risk for breast cancer to have screening mammograms is once a year, starting at the age of 40. With that being said, I know there's been conflicting recommendations made by other groups, which has led to a lot of confusion for women about this. But screening annually at 40 is encouraged because of the multiple decades of research and study that actually do show a decrease in death rate and increased treatment options due to the earlier detection of breast cancers that are able to be detected because of that screening annually. And data also shows that screening starting at the age of 40, saves the most lives. So that's why we continue to recommend that. And for those women that are higher risk for breast cancer, we do recommend starting annual screening even earlier. Usually that's between the ages of 25 to 30, and that frequency would still be once a year.
So I'm hearing you say screen, screen, screen.
Screen.
Awesome. So this next question is for you too. I feel like Dr. Winn needs to close his ears when I ask this question. But anyway, so the question is, let's talk for a moment about women with dense breasts. When I was growing up, I was thinking, oh, you have dense breasts. That means they're voluptuous and firm and all of these things, and it's so wonderful. But as I got older, having dense breasts can be tricky because it makes it very difficult to detect cancerous tumors. So let's talk a little bit more about the science of what dense breasts are and what extra level of diligence do you think women who have dense breasts should be exercising? So.
Another great question. I'll try to hit all of those topics there that you mentioned. But first, I'd emphasize that dense breasts are normal variation. Oftentimes it's made to, thought that it's fibrocystic breast disease as if it were an abnormality. But a way to think about it is just like everyone has different shoe size, breast size, everyone has different amounts of the glandular tissue in their breast versus that fatty tissue. And that glandular tissue is what's stimulated in pregnancy, what does all the work in breastfeeding, but it's the tissue that actually does show up white to us on the mammogram. Women are, by imaging, women are considered to have dense breast if they indeed have more than 50% of that glandular or white tissue on mammogram. And then, as you can imagine, it's harder to detect something abnormally white on a background of white versus detecting something, abnormally white on a background of that fatty or gray tissue. So that is why it becomes more difficult to detect all masses, cancerous and non-cancerous, as breast density increases. The dense tissue doesn't, though, affect our ability to see other findings, such as calcifications on mammogram. We're still able to see those quite well. And then in regards to the extra level of diligence that you asked about that patients should exercise, of course, I'm screaming again, screening mammography. Women should be diligent about that, of course. But that's particularly important because the breast density can make it difficult for masses to be detected on self and clinical exams. So oftentimes sometimes that imaging helps to supplement that. And then also making sure radiologists that women visit are including clinical correlation of the findings in their image review. That's particularly key in women with dense breast tissue. At VCU, all of our breast imagers are routinely talking to every patient, examining ourselves, areas of concern prior to all the ultrasounds. And if imaging is negative, even sometimes patients concerned and symptoms will even trigger a follow-up, which can lead to kind of interval diagnosis of cancer just because of that. And then I think the other thing with special imaging options that you asked about, 3D tomosynthesis, of course, is the hot topic. That's a newer technology that we offer to everyone, and it's a way to look through the breast tissue in 1 millimeter slices to, in essence, kind of see through or see into the density, kind of as if you were to scroll through a CT scan. So that helps us to kind of see through what may be masked by density. Diagnostic evaluations when we're working up areas of concern. Those can include a targeted ultrasound in an area that looks concerning on mammogram or for focal exam changes. And that's the way, even if the mammogram is limited by breast density, cancers can still be detected. And there have been studies that show that together, a normal ultrasound and negative mammogram, that can confirm that no cancer is present in greater than 90% of the time. So kind of using a combination of imaging modalities can sometimes help where mammogram is limited in dense women. I think I hit all the highlights, but let me know if I missed anything.
You did. That was an action-packed question. I'm sorry. So for women who have dense breasts, they shouldn't feel afraid to ask their doctor, look, I want you to do all the things that you just said, because some of those words were really fancy. They may not remember those words, but it's like, I want you to do everything you really can to help detect for my type of breast, right?
Yes. Advocating for yourself, any areas of concern, we're always available for peace of mind. I'd say we are here in between screening to evaluate anything that is concerning to patients or detected on exams by doctors.
Perfect. So given my family history, I have been getting mammograms since I was 35, like you said, an earlier age than most. But a mammogram didn't actually detect my cancer. I actually just discovered it while I was in the shower, and I wasn't one of those women who did monthly self-exams or anything like that. And when I noticed it, it just really didn't seem that big of a deal. It felt like this peanut-sized thing. And the thought really crossed my mind of like, well, dude, you're just being a worrywart. Let's not even do anything about this. What's wrong with you? Like, you're always worried about something. Dr. Hong, what advice would you give to women who may detect something, even a little something, whether they find a lump or they see that their nipple's different? What would you tell them to do?
So you should always, always, always speak to your doctor and get a clinical examination. Never allow anybody to say, oh, it's probably nothing. They need to examine you, evaluate you, take a thorough history. And really, in most cases, unless it's something that comes and goes and is tied to your periods and there's really no suspicion that this is worrisome, imaging, regardless of your age and your family history and risk factor, is really the next step. So if your doctor or your nurse practitioner says, oh, you don't need any follow-up, find another person, because so failure to diagnose breast cancer is actually one of the most common reasons why primary care physicians are sued in this country, which means that it happens a lot. I've met a lot of young women who had their diagnosis delayed because they were told, oh, you're too young, it can't be breast cancer. Oh, it doesn't feel like a breast cancer. You can't tell on physical examination at all. There's no way. So imaging and clinical evaluation and follow-up, and anything suspicious gets a biopsy.
Thank you. So That was eye-opening. I did not realize that the number one malpractice case has to do with people not detecting cancer early. Wow, wow, wow. Let's go to the next question. So this one is for Dr. McGuire. Even if someone is diagnosed with breast cancer is not all the same, right? When my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer 23 years ago, or my grandmother was diagnosed almost 50 years ago, this receptor status thing that I talked about, like I'm triple positive, I mean, they weren't even using that kind of terminology. So can you talk a little bit about what this receptor status means and, why it matters?
Absolutely. I think it's become one of the most important factors about breast cancer as we move on. In fact, sometimes we talk more about those receptors than we talk about, is it ductal or lobular? What part of the breast is it coming from? That's less important than the receptors. And so the three receptors that we look at are estrogen, progesterone, which make a lot of sense. They're female hormones. They make regular breast cells grow. They can make cancers grow too. And then this thing called HER2, which is a little bit more difficult to wrap your head around. It's a growth factor, long story short. It's present in all the cells in everyone's bodies. When there's too many of them on a breast cancer cell, it makes the breast cancer grow more quickly. And so somebody like Rudene, who's triple positive, means that estrogen, progesterone, and HER2 are all contributing to the growth of that cancer. And so that means we have three amazing targets. We can target estrogen and block that. We can target HER2. We have amazing miracle drugs, more coming out every day. When I think about my best friend's mother in high school had a HER2 positive breast cancer, and she passed away from metastatic breast cancer because she was diagnosed with a HER2 positive breast cancer before we had treatment for it. They didn't realize that she had a HER2 positive breast cancer until she had a metastasis, and then in retrospect, were able to treat her. My mother had a triple negative breast cancer, and so she had no targets, and so she got chemotherapy. So not only does it and those are very aggressive tumors. Those are ones that Black women, African American women, women of African heritage in general, especially West African, tend to be more predisposed to. And so these are the things that are really important. Not only does it tell you sort of how quickly is your cancer going to grow, but what can we use to treat it? And so it makes all the difference medically when you talk about the receptors.
And can I back you up just one quick second? And Rudene, I think you said something that was really important. You knew your history. Family secret kills. This is one of the things that in African-American communities is really one of the things I'm trying to get us all to talk about, our health, because what you know about your auntie's health, what you know about your mom, your grandma's health, actually has an ability to tip you off that maybe you should be much more concerned. And I think of Chadwick Boseman, but I think of all the people I've actually known that I grew up with who knew that, well, aunt died from something, but they didn't know what it was. What you just gave, that history, my mom, my aunt, my grandmother, becomes really important for all of us to actually have a history, to know where to start. So I also want to put an exclamation point on molecular markers, because I'm telling you, it has been a game changer. But I also want to go back to an exclamation point of what you just said, and that is being honest and open and not hiding our history. There's nothing to be ashamed about. Cancer happens.
It's funny you say that, because when I was diagnosed, I thought of myself as being broken and defective. And I mentioned that to my husband, and he was like, "What is wrong with you?" Like you said, cancer just happens. But again,
Good man.
Enough about me. Okay, so Dr. McGuire, I'm sticking with you. So let's talk about treatment options. I think a question that comes up often is, should I do a lumpectomy or mastectomy? Are there better outcomes depending upon the treatment this treatment option that I choose? So what do you think about that?
So I think that the one primary place to start is whether, as long as you're eligible for both, whether you choose a lumpectomy or mastectomy, unless you have a very specific genetic mutation, a BRCA mutation that predisposes you to breast cancer, your survival is exactly the same whether you choose a lumpectomy or mastectomy. A lot of women out there think that a mastectomy offers superior survival, and it is not the case. You are not going to be on this earth one day longer with a mastectomy than you will with a lumpectomy. And so that's something that really surprises a lot of people when they come to see me. And so I think it ends up changing a lot of minds as to what they think they want to do, because I think every woman thinks, oh, if I get a breast cancer, I'm just going to have both of them off. I hear that all the time. And certainly that would be effective and it would work, but it's a long run for a short slide in many cases. So, a lumpectomy and radiation in some of the more recent studies has actually been associated with an improved survival. Now that is not, these are small studies, retrospective, there could be bias, but it's at least the same. And so with a lumpectomy, I mean, you can say as well as I can, you go home the same day, you have no drains involved, you're just back to life a heck of a lot quicker. So if it's an option, it's something that I really encourage women to think about strongly. Now, there are some women who are not eligible to have a lumpectomy. If you can't have radiation for most women, then a lumpectomy is not your best choice. If your tumor is in multiple spots in the breast, then a lumpectomy is not your best choice. If you've already had and been treated for a breast cancer, with radiation, and you're not eligible for repeat radiation, then a mastectomy is going to be your best choice. But most women have an option.
Thank you, because I think that is an eye-opening statement for a lot of people. So Dr. Hong, I'm giving you a really tough question. And let's talk about, the other sort of parts of people's breast cancer journey, possibly chemotherapy. People always sort of freaked out, like, what are the side effects? What's going to happen to my hair? Dr. Winn can probably remember, Dr. Winn, Dr. McGuire, Dr. Sherpa. A lot of people on this call can kind of remember me sort of freaking out, like, okay, so when am I going to lose my hair? Dr. Biden's supposed to come. Is she going to see me with a bald head or not? So the question for you is, let's talk a bit about the side effects. And, for women who lose their hair, why do they lose their hair? And then talk about radiation, because I think that's also the boogeyman of cancer.
Okay, so what chemotherapy, there are many different types of chemotherapeutic agents, and basically what they do is it stops rapidly dividing cells. Hair is rapidly dividing, it continues to grow, and so it just arrests the hair from growing, and then it dies and falls out. And so that's why a lot of chemotherapeutic agents cause people to lose their hair, but the hair grows back. So I think that's very, very important. You're not permanently bald and the hair grows back. And a lot of times people say the hair grows back differently or better, it's curlier. So it's a temporary situation that can be addressed with scarves and wigs and lots of other options. People are afraid of chemotherapy, I think, because when they hear the word chemo, they think of the atom bomb. They remember somebody years ago getting chemo being debilitated, or they remember those movies of people dying in the hospital. That is not chemotherapy today. We do not admit people for chemotherapy in the breast cancer world unless there's something else going on where they're sick. So like if they have COVID. But in general, this is an outpatient thing. That means that you go to clinic, you check in, you get your treatment, and you go home, which means that the vast majority of people do incredibly well with chemotherapy. We know what the potential side effects are, nausea, vomiting, and we treat that ahead of time with medicines. And so we actually have lots of great drugs to help minimize the side effects. Some people experience neuropathy, so that's where you feel like you have some numbness, tingling, burning in your hands and feet. And for the vast majority of people, it happens during treatment and then goes away. And so I've had lots of patients terrified of chemotherapy who, once they're done, say, wow, it was fine. I mean, I've had patients who say they just sort of raced through chemo and, everything was a breeze. And so you have no idea. No one knows exactly how chemotherapy is going to affect them. And so if it's something that your doctors recommend, there's a reason for it. It is part of how we are going to cure your cancer.
And I got a quick question. Is it not true that as of 2021, we tend to have more people living with cancer than dying from it? And that's new?
That is new, and it's going to continue to grow. In 1973, we had 3 million cancer survivors. Now it's up to 26 million. It's going to continue to grow. Therapies are getting better. We are minimizing the toxicities of treatment, and even metastatic breast cancer is considered a chronic condition because people live years with metastatic breast cancer. One of my patients is 18 years metastatic and still fine. So yeah, I mean, it's a completely different world than the world of your mom or grandparents.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that there are a lot of women who are diagnosed with breast cancer and treated for breast cancer who don't need chemotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
Women whose tumors are primarily driven by estrogen, which is the more common type of breast cancer, 85% of them do not need chemotherapy. It doesn't mean we're setting you the 4 winds and hope for the best. You're going to get one of these estrogen blocking pills. But so that I think is one thing that sometimes stops women from seeking care for a lump, is they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to need surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, I'm going to die of the treatment. And the treatment has become so much easier to get through as time goes by. And I think Dr. Hong's going to talk a little bit maybe about the radiation piece, because I think that's something that scares people a bit too.
You know what? I just wanted to say real quick, can't nobody convince me that this is why we do the research. Everybody gets afraid of the word research too, and clinical trials. Without those clinical trials, without that research, we don't find these molecular targeted therapies. We don't understand how we can get better with the radiation, how we get better with chemo. So I know that we always, when you say research, everybody Tuskegee. Tuskegee happened in 1932. United States public syphilis study in 1932 that went to 72. And I get it. And we should be suspect and suspicious. But if that suspicion is keeping us from being part and taking part in these cures, that's something as a community we also have to think about. So I'm sorry to interject, because the radiation thing is actually really important, but I just needed to give a shout out to the fact that these folks you see on the Zoom are doing that research every day. And we need you, because when we don't have African-American women in these studies, it doesn't help us, it actually hurts.
So I used to say, so back to research before I talk about radiation, I used to say, if you're a white male, that's great, because we know everything about your body and we know everything that works. Anybody else, you're kind of screwed, right? We take data from one cohort and think that it applies to everybody. Even women were underrepresented in research up until really the 2000s. So it's really, 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 really important for everybody to participate in research, because we need to know what works best for you individually. Anyway, so back to radiation. So radiation is not something that everybody needs to get. So there are certain reasons why people are offered radiation. So for example, lumpectomy, it is always done with radiation, and that's to decrease your risk for recurrence. If people have involved lymph nodes, they get radiation, but radiation isn't something that all women get. Most women tolerate radiation very well. Some women will say that they actually found it more exhausting than chemotherapy, which when I first heard that, I was a little bit surprised, but the vast majority of women get 6 weeks of radiation, they're done, they feel fine. It doesn't cause people to lose their hair. It's low, it's regional, it's targeted to the areas that they need to treat. The radiation oncologists do an excellent job shielding all the other parts of your body so that nothing else is affected besides what they want, where they want the radiation to go.
Thank you for demystifying the chemotherapy and radiation, because I think those are the two main reasons why a lot of people just kind of hold off when they just detect something, because they're afraid of the unknown. So I know we're running short on time for the physicians panel, but there are a couple other questions I think I'd really like to tackle. Dr. McGuire, I think it's really important that people understand, what Massey can provide for folks who are diagnosed with breast cancer. So can you talk specifically about what Massey's breast cancer program looks like and what research that's being done within the four corners there to help improve diagnosis and treatment for breast cancer?
Absolutely. I couldn't be prouder to be a Massey physician. I've been here for about 4 years, and it's some of the most meaningful and exciting work I've done. And I think that has to do with the fact that I've been instrumental in helping improve access for all patients with breast cancer. One of the things that we do, I think, so much better than everybody else, is that when a woman is diagnosed with a breast cancer, basically Dr. Tucker gives them the unfortunate news and picks up the phone, and she makes a phone call, and she doesn't make a phone call to make an appointment with me. She makes a phone call to make an appointment with me, a medical oncologist, and a radiation oncologist. They meet their navigator and they meet a social worker all in one day. For some people that can be overwhelming, but for other people, we just save them hours out of their lives and they get all the answers at once, rather than having to wait to get it piecemeal. And also we work as a group. So we talk about every cancer case before we see the patient. And so you're not going to get me telling you one thing and the medical oncologist telling you another thing, and you having to sort through it and figure it out. We come with one solid message. And I think that can be incredibly reassuring for people. So that's something that we do that's baseline, I think, is something you're not going to find everywhere. That is standard of care. But we don't want to practice the standard of care. We want to advance the standard of care. And that's what we've been talking about with research, is we want to find better ways to do things, because if we hadn't, then we'd still be doing awful mastectomies like they were doing in the 1950s. So some of the research that we have going on respects the fact that we have really, really good outcomes in breast cancer for most patients. And so we want to reduce the side effects of that breast cancer treatment. So a lot of our clinical trials right now are about doing less, which sounds a little bit scary, but kind of exciting. So taking out fewer lymph nodes when we're checking lymph nodes, which we haven't talked too much about, but it is part of cancer surgery for a lot of women. We talk about giving less chemotherapy, trying to avoid the side effects like the neuropathies. We talk about, if we do have to do bigger surgeries, how do we still make sure that you don't have the unfortunate side effects? And then on the flip side, we have women who do have really, really bad cancer. I've talked about it before, the triple negative breast cancer. We don't have a target there. So how do we treat these women? Because a lot of times their cancers act a lot like lung cancers. So we've dipped our toes into some of those therapies, things like immune therapy, which a lot of people have heard about. We're trying that on breast cancer patients, because a lot of times their cancers do underneath the microscope look a lot like a lung cancer. And so those are some of the things that we have to offer people, that will allow them to get tomorrow's cancer care today. And that is so important. Is today's breast cancer care is a heck of a lot better than it was even when I started, and that wasn't that long ago, I think. But it's going to be so much better 20 years from now that I'm not going to recognize it. And so that's what's so exciting. And those are some of the things that we do here that matter so much.
That goes back to the optimism that Dr. Tucker talked about in terms of cancer care and the revolution that's happening in cancer. So let's go back to you, Dr. Hong, because you mentioned something that I think made everybody's eyes kind of bulge when you said that you had someone in your care who's metastatic and has been alive for 18 years. That is amazing. So can you talk a bit more about survivorship and what that means?
So survivorship, it has different meanings for different people, but the way we define survivorship at Massey is anybody diagnosed with cancer. So from the time of diagnosis, because the part of what's important about delivering survivorship care is looking at the holistic long-term health and well-being of the individual. And you can't do that after the fact. You actually have to look at the person right from the start, what their needs are, what resources they have, what their comorbidities are, what's important to them, and factor all of those things into the care that they receive and the care that they'll continue to get ongoing. So survivorship is from the time of diagnosis, and it isn't just about surveillance for cancer recurrence, which is also really, really important, because you are a survivor, whether you are a metastatic breast cancer survivor or you had DCIS, it is for anybody diagnosed with cancer. And the reason that we don't say survivorship is just about surveillance is because there's a lot more to taking care of the whole person than just having them come back for their imaging and their clinical examination. We want to know, are you still experiencing neuropathy? Have you had your other prevention and screening? Have you had genetic testing if you didn't have genetic testing? Are you getting everything that you need? How has cancer impacted your mental health and well-being? Do you need legal resources to help with employment? Like, we look at everything because we know that a cancer diagnosis can impact everything for individuals.
And can I just jump in real quick and say, I think what Dr. Hong just said was incredibly important around 3 buckets. Screening is not prevention. There's prevention, there's screening, and there's treatment. When we talk about prevention, those early things we talked about access to foods, eating well, exercising, all the stuff that your grandmother told you about, that stuff actually does matter. Not getting a whole bunch of stress on you. Turns out that those types of things, being mindful and having some time to really, what they call mindfulness and these other things, those small things, finding joy. I always say happiness. I say finding some joy in your life, right? All of these things actually contribute to that prevention of these issues. And then you have screening, which is what we spend a lot of time on. I just wanted to make that pitch because sometimes people think prevention means I just go get screened. There's that other stuff that you have of not smoking, eating the right foods, getting some exercise, getting some sleep. All the rest of these things build up to prevention and prevention behavior that we can all, do a little bit better at tweaking and getting better at that stuff. Certainly remaining at a healthy weight, which is, I know I done said, whoa, this is how I don't get invited back. I know I just said something. Somebody said, what that boy say? I said it, getting exercise daily, right? We say half an hour, at least 5 times a week, but actually being at a body weight, because we know obesity, we're getting a sense that obesity and being overweight actually contributes to cancer. These are the types of discussions I think that we could have even more in the community, that Dr. Shepard and others from her camp reminds people all the time that behaviors matter, prevention matters as much as, bottom line is, I'd rather have to prevent something than to treat it, but when we got to treat it, we got you.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Winn, I think honesty matters too, right? We got to be honest with ourselves, with our loved ones. If we see something, we just say something, right, about their behaviors. So I love that, finding joy too, because I think that's a real critical part, particularly for Black women. Sometimes they take on all these stressors of the world and they don't take time to take care of themselves. And that's true of mothers, right? That's just kind of how we are. But I had one more question for Dr. Tucker, because I think we can't leave this conversation without saying, okay, you've given me lots of great information. I'm kind of overwhelmed. I haven't gotten a mammogram in the last couple of years, 3 years. What should I do? Like, what's my next step?
Where to start? And well, anyone, if they're in that instance where they haven't had a mammogram within the past year, we're in October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, so there's no better time to start or restart now at an accredited imaging center with fellowship-trained breast imagers to have that expertise. We at VCU, we give gifts to all of our patients the whole month, so it's a great time to visit us if you want a gift. And we have multiple locations, even a new one opening in Short Pump in January of next year. Also, newer guidelines for formal risk assessment for women kind of age 25 to 30. That's a good place to start as well. They're particularly helpful for African American women and other high-risk groups that have an increased risk for breast cancer that's also more likely to be aggressive. And this risk assessment can give you a more individualized screening recommendation, which could include our most sensitive screening tool, which is a breast MRI as well. And for those that are currently up to date with their screening, like was mentioned before, diagnostic mammograms as opposed to screening, those are the ones that can be ordered by your doctor to help us evaluate any new concerns or findings. And with that, we are able to help decrease patient anxiety and worry about findings that pop up between screenings. So that's also helpful. And at VCU, we're even happy to reevaluate breast concerns. We get a lot of questions and a lot of requests for second opinions for our breast imaging expertise too. And so that often provides women with more confidence within their results, just having an extra set of eyes, reviewing their images and doing any additional workup that we think might be needed. So those are several kind of starting points of kind of where to start with regards to imaging and kind of risk assessment.
One thing I did want to make very, very clear is that you do not need a prescription for a screening mammogram. You need a doctor, a nurse practitioner.
Call us.
Yeah. Just pick up the phone and make an appointment. As long as you've got somebody that these folks can send that report back to, you can do it on your own. Don't wait. I think that is a common misperception amongst every woman. And this is up to you. This is your opportunity to make a good healthcare decision for yourself. Don't wait for some doctor to tell you to do it, except for me, because I just told you to do it.
I'll tell you to do it. So thank you. All of you. Thank you, Dr. McGuire. Thank you, Dr. Tucker, Dr. Hong, Dr. Winn. Really appreciate your thoughtfulness, your candor. And being able to answer questions pretty rapid fire. So thank you. At this point, we're going to have a brief interlude. I feel like we should have some mood music for this interlude that I'm going to have with Dr. Vanessa Shepard. But we're going to talk a minute about, a little bit more about health disparities and how clinical research can be helpful in addressing health disparities. And then I think Dr. Shepard's going to share with us a video too. But again, thank you all for being here. And Dr. Shepard, it's your turn. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us about the work that you do at Massey?
Absolutely. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm Dr. Vanessa Shepard. I have the privilege of working at VCU Massey Cancer Center, the Cancer Center for Virginia. And at Massey, I have two roles. So one role, which is critical for me, and it's very important, is I'm the Associate Director for Community Outreach, Engagement, and Health Disparities. And in that role, we work very hard to focus on eliminating cancer disparities by connecting with our community, connecting our scientists with our community members, and really wanting to learn how we can conduct research that's most relevant for our community and implement programs to reduce some of the structural barriers that you were talking about earlier, such as transportation, helping people quit smoking, maintaining a healthy weight, and working with the community to offer these programs for free. The other thing I do at Massey is I have my own research lab, and my research is focused on breast cancer disparities, specifically trying to understand some of the ways we can modify some of the barriers and contributors of disparities, specifically for African American women. And so we do that through observational studies, sort of identifying where, particularly in that cancer care delivery continuum, can we improve care, or maybe developing interventions to help reduce the risk of breast cancer.
All right. Well, again, you're doing God's work over at Massey, and we appreciate that. I think you do have a video that you want to share with us that kind of brings home the direct link between clinical research and trying to reduce and eliminate health disparities. Is there anything you want to say before we share the video?
Sure. So I'll just say that this specific research project is my FUBU project. So this is for us, by us. And the research itself was informed by the community and done in partnership. So the things that we have. So I'll let you play the video and I can answer a question afterwards.
Awesome.
Greetings. I'm excited to tell you about a study that is now open at VCU. The study, entitled Improving Communication and Adherence in Black Breast Cancer Survivors, is funded by the American Cancer Society and is a clinical trial focused on African American women with breast cancer. The study is being conducted in Virginia and in Washington, D.C. This non-therapeutic interventional trial will test the efficacy of a culturally tailored intervention entitled Sisters Informing Sisters, or SIS, on improving patient adherence to systemic therapy and patient-centered communication. SIS was developed in partnership with African American survivors, advocates, and health professionals. In this two-arm trial, women will be assigned to either the SIS intervention or enhanced usual care. The intervention includes 3 sessions with a trained survivor coach over 1 year, and also receive a culturally tailored patient guidebook. Women in the enhanced usual care arm will receive a low literacy summary of their recommended treatment. The team at VCU is led by Dr. Vanessa Shepard and includes several collaborators such as Dr. Hitel Vachani. At the time of funding, this was the largest single investigator grant awarded in Virginia from the American Cancer Society. We want to be sure that we're able to recruit 200 women from Virginia over the next 4 years. For more information, please contact us by telephone or email. Thank you for your help.
I love seeing this video. I've seen it like 10 times, Dr. Shepard. Can you tell us what prompted this particular study, and how do you determine the focus of your other clinical research studies?
Sure. So in reality, this study really came from an experience in the community, actually here in Virginia, with someone that was diagnosed with breast cancer years ago as a young woman. And she was educated and was very fearful of chemotherapy. I know you spoke about that earlier. And the individuals in her social network were not knowledgeable about chemotherapy either. And so there was a great delay. And unfortunately, by the time she decided to have treatment that was recommended, her cancer had spread. And so she left behind 2 very handsome boys at the time. And so this really prompted me to think about, was this an isolated incident? I was angry. I felt like there were failures in the health system. And we began to hear that this was more common than we thought, both in Virginia and in Washington, D.C. And so this work really began to develop tools to listen to stories. We reviewed tons of materials, over 500 materials, and none of those at the time had Black women on them. And so this work really began when we coined the term survivor coach a long time ago in 2005, and really work with the community to develop these tools. So it takes a while. And I think for me, it came full circle when we were piloting some of the things. And there was a woman who had two young boys and was around the age that this woman had been, and was really running from her physician. She was running from surgery, neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And because we had the pilot at the time, she was able to connect with a survivor coach who was able to understand really what the issues were and to help her to understand. And she had her treatment. And it's been 6 years later, and she's doing great with her sons. And so that's where the study impetus came from, and working with the community and training survivors as survivor coaches was so beneficial. We learned so much, and getting women to tell their story, because we do believe that therapeutic relationship with the woman and her provider is so key. And so we want to do all that we can to promote that. How we determine, the second part of the question was how do we determine our trials? And there are various ways that we do it. But one of the things with Disparities, we do try to listen to our community. We do try to examine what's the burden of cancer and where are those places that the burden of cancer may seem to be higher, and prioritize that in partnership with hearing from, I think, stakeholders and survivors and advocates. And that's been beneficial to my career personally, and then wanting to ensure that we have trials that can be accessed by African Americans. And then when important, maybe have trials that solely focus on African American women themselves.
Well, again, thank you for the life-changing work that you do at Massey. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I think I'm signed up for 2 clinical research trials right now. So yay.
Oh, thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you. If we're not in them, it can't be about us. And so I think that's what's so important. And not every trial involves a drug, right? So
exactly.
that's also right.
And neither of mine involve drugs. So there you go.
All right. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shepard.
Thank you.
I think now we'll turn to our breast cancer survivors panel. And I'm sorry, we're running about 10 minutes behind, but if you give me until 8:10, we're going to wrap this up with a nice bow. I don't see my panelists. Oh, there they are. They're coming in. While they are being spotlighted, I want to thank them for your presence and for sharing with us in advance your real lived experience as cancer conquerors. I much prefer that term than the term cancer survivor, because you're doing more than surviving, you're conquering, right?
Right.
But I'd like for each of you to take a moment to share with us your personal breast cancer journey. I'd like to start with Gwen.
Okay, thank you, Rudene. 8 years ago, in May of 2013, a routine annual mammogram revealed a microscopic calcification cluster. I was told by the radiologist there was low suspicion of breast cancer, but I would have to undergo a surgical biopsy. So to my surprise, I was informed I had DCIS, which stands for ductal carcinoma in situ, which is cancer in the milk ducts. It was non-invasive stage 1 breast cancer, and it was estrogen positive. I immediately began my research online via Google University, as I like to call it, to learn more about the disease and the treatment options. In retrospect, I truly believe that my journey was designed by God Himself, because everything from start to the completion of my treatment was in divine order. Let me first say that it is very important to tell others of your diagnosis, because by doing so, you can be directed to the right people at the right time. And I will say that Sisters Network Central Virginia provided me with a beautiful sunshine package. And the book that I have back here somewhere, I think you can see, was a part of that. I thank you so much, Zelma, and your group. I met with 4 breast surgical physicians at the various medical facilities in the area. Yes, 4, I'm excessive. I was equipped with my notebook, the necessary questions, and the love and support of my dear husband, William, who accompanied me to all of my appointments, holding my clothes during my many examinations. I was prepared to have a double mastectomy, as the doctors mentioned earlier, because it would eliminate the need for radiation, and I believe that it would reduce the chances of recurrence dramatically. After meeting with 4 physicians, they all convinced me, I say convinced, they're the professionals, right? Convinced me that a mastectomy would be too radical for DCIS. So I listened to the medical professionals and agreed to have a lumpectomy followed by 6 weeks of radiation. I thought I had selected the right breast surgical physician and was prepared to proceed. But God had another plan. The same day I scheduled my appointment with the physician, a dear friend called, highly recommending another breast surgical physician who ultimately performed my lumpectomy. The next step was external beam radiation therapy, which was my greatest concern. When I met with each doctor, I expressed concern about the adverse effect the radiation could have on my heart since I had left-sided breast cancer. I was told that there should not be any reason for concern, but God had another plan. So, having shared my diagnosis with a neighbor, I learned that there was a radiation oncologist on my street who I only casually knew. Didn't even realize I knew he was a physician. I didn't know he was a radiation oncologist. After expressing my concerns, he called his friend, the radiation oncologist who I had already scheduled an appointment with at VCU Medical Center. And after telling him of my concerns, it was decided that I would come in that next week to be trained for a deep inspiration breath hold, known as DIBH. And I must add that this deep inspiration breath holding technique was only available at VCU Medical Center at that time. During the DIBH, I held my breath for 20 seconds while the radiation was delivered. By taking a deep breath in, my lungs filled with air and my heart was moved away from my chest. This procedure was not widely used at that time for many reasons. The actual daily treatment took only a few minutes, and I was equipped with my post-radiation cream to help relieve any resulting pain and inflammation. In conclusion, during my breast cancer journey, I was abundantly blessed with excellent medical professionals, faith, family, and fortitude. I daily recited Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can remember my pastor's response, I'm sorry, at the completion of my treatment, which was actually 8 years ago this month. And he said he was happy to know that I was healed, in full recovery, with a calm spirit. And I want to say one other thing about the calm spirit. My husband told me during this entire ordeal that I was more calm during this entire year than I had been and than I have been since. But that is the end of my story.
Thank you so much for sharing. I don't think calm was the word that was used to describe me at all. Delegate McQuinn, would you mind sharing with us your story?
Thank you, Rudene, and thank you all for the opportunity to share this. I was in February of 1992, 29 years ago. I remember going to one of my doctors, at that time, Dr. Linda Willis was an African-American female doctor, to tell her and to share with her about the situation with my breast. And it was actually my nipple that had a discharge. And I remember her saying she wanted to test it and take a culture. She did. She later called me to let me know that there was a bacteria. She said, I'm going to give you Bactrim. And she said, but meanwhile, I want to have this tested. And a few days later, she called me back to say, I think I want to send you to a surgeon. Indeed, there's bacteria there. And by this time, actually, the discharge had started healing because I was putting this cream on it. And I went and she said, but I want you to go to a surgeon. And she said, I just want to possibly do a biopsy to just make sure everything is good. And that was after there was some x-rays that was done. I did that. Dr. Manikadi Karup, who matter of fact, just recently passed, was the one who ended up doing the biopsy. And it came back to me that certainly it was breast cancer. It was interesting the way I found out, because I received a telephone call from the doctor's office, and the nurse at that time said, Dr. Karup would love for you to come back, would like for you to come back to his office. And I certainly, at that time, 36 years old, my question was, is something wrong? And she said, well, I'm not at liberty to discuss that at this moment. And so quite naturally, I already knew. I remember, matter of fact, standing by the telephone. I didn't have a cell phone. Okay, it was a landline, and just falling down on the wall. I called my mom and I said, Mom, something is wrong. My husband was at work. And so then I called him and I said, something is going on, and Dr. Karup want me to come to his office on Thursday. And I went to the office, he sat me down, he had a discussion with me, and he said, again, 29 years ago, but he said, the cancer that it's positive, estrogen positive. He said, but it's a very aggressive kind of cancer. And he said, so I want to go in. He said, I'm going to do a radical mastectomy. And he said, that means I'm going to take out your lymph nodes. I'll take the breast. He said, I'll have to cut through muscles. And he did all of that. And he said, I cannot, after he concluded with it, and I went to the hospital, matter of fact, a couple of days later, and he was telling me once I had the surgery, he said, it had, in 3 days' time, you could see the growth from where the cancer was when I did the biopsy. And he said to me, he said, thank God. He said, now let me tell you, I can't control cancer coming anywhere else in your body. He said, but the way I went in to cut, he said, I can be 99.9% certain that it is not going to come back in that space. But he was a man of faith as well. And so then I went on, going through the procedure, went through that procedure and the chemotherapy. And I guess we're going to get a chance to talk about that later. I don't know if you want me to talk about it now or wait, but it was brutal. It was absolutely, beg your pardon?
You can talk about your experience if you like.
Yeah, it was absolutely horrific. The experience that I heard the doctor say today about the atomic bomb, that is not the way that things are handled. Well, I told my LA, I said, yeah, but I felt like I was hit by a missile because I was so ill. And when I heard the word cancer, the only thing I thought about really was death. And I had a strong system of people around me that prayed. There were friends praying. Being a woman of faith, my family was praying. My neighbors that was aware of it was praying. And I had again, a strong support system and people to walk with me. Certainly as time went on, Sisters Network has been such a lifesaver for so many people and organization. But the bottom line is that I know it was faith that got me through it. But the chemo at that time, I was sick for days. And every time I started to feel better, it was time for chemo again. And I think I often have told people that my treatment was worse than the cancer because of the way it impacted me. And, I was depressed, and I ended up going to see a psychiatrist. I was, a lot of crying. I had my memory. I would be going places and could not figure out exactly where I was on my way to. I mean, it was those kind of experience. And I know Gwen talks about her husband. My husband truly was so strong. through this to help support me. But even until today, he has never, ever talked about it. Only once had he said anything, and that was about 20 years ago when I said that I was giving consideration to do a reconstructive surgery. And he said, why carry yourself through that kind of pain? But other than that, it has been no discussion at all on my journey with the breast cancer. But he was there, he was supportive, he stayed from work, took a leave of absence. He made sure I had food, mainly lemon drops, okay? Because that's basically what I ate. So that was sort of the experience in a nutshell. But again, I know that it was my faith that propelled me forward and out of the circumstances that I had to deal with.
Thank you so much, Delegate McQuinn. There's so much I could say to unpack what you've said, but I'm not. Thank you for sharing, though. So I'm calling you Dr. Watkins now, Zelma. Yes. Look at that. I'm speaking that into existence.
Speak it.
Would you like to share your story with us?
Yes, my name is Zelma Watkins, and I'm the founder of Sisters Network Central Virginia, and I'm a 21-year breast cancer survivor. Rudene is my neighbor and friend, and Dolores McQuinn has been my friend since the age of 6. So we go way, way, way back. And Winn has been a friend and a supporter of Sisters Network for many years. So it is an honor to be on this platform with you ladies. At the age of 45, I went in for a routine mammogram. And when they say we need to take more pictures, you know, you get a little suspicious. So I said, okay. So we take some more pictures, and then it's, oh, we didn't get a good angle. We need a few more pictures. We take some more pictures, and then it's, well, you know, let's just do an ultrasound while you're here. Okay, so we do an ultrasound, and then it's, I think you need to see a surgeon. So my family had used Dr. Kandace for other surgeries, not breast cancer, but just other surgeries. We knew he was at the top of his class. We knew that he had great bedside manner. So we called Dr. Kandace, went in with the family to talk to Dr. Kandace, had the biopsy. And after the biopsy, Dr. Kandace did give me a phone call one evening at home, but he also waited until like after 6 p.m. because he wanted to make sure I was not at work, that I was at home when I received this call. And so when he called, he did say that it was breast cancer, and he wanted me to bring whomever I wanted to bring with me to his office so we could discuss possibilities for moving forward, you know, what type of surgery and so on and so forth. So I took, I believe, my husband, my mom, and I believe they were the two that went with me. But by the time I got to Dr. Kandace, I had started doing some research. But Gwen, I didn't do Google, but I called a friend. Somebody told me that this particular lady had had breast cancer. I honestly did not know a soul that had had breast cancer other than Dolores. But they said, this lady has had breast cancer and hers was recent. So why don't you call her? And I'll tell you who she is because she talks about it and she supports our organization. It's Rita Ricks. I called Rita Ricks, and Rita Ricks told me her story. She said, Zelma, it is a bump in the road. You're gonna be fine. She said, it's a bump in the road, and trust me, you will get over it. She gave me the confidence that I needed. I started reading a little bit and researching a little bit. And when I went in to see Dr. Kandace, and he said, I'm gonna recommend a lumpectomy. He said, but it is truly your choice. He says, what do you think? What do you wanna do? I said, Dr. Kandace, I did a lot of reading and asking questions before I got here, and I agree with you. We need to do a lumpectomy. So that's what we did. He had it scheduled for the early part of February, and February 3rd was my son's birthday. And I said, I do not want my son remembering that his mom had breast cancer surgery on his birthday. So if it's okay with you, Dr. Kandace, and I said, you tell me, you're the professional, I want to wait a week or so. Let me have his birthday with him first. So we did that. And then I went in the hospital to have my lumpectomy. And I remember telling my son, I said, I think he was 10. Yeah, because 21 years ago, he was 12, because he's 33 now. So anyway, I said, Mom will be home tonight. And he looked at me like, okay, Mama, if you say so. I said, I'm gonna be home tonight. They're doing a lumpectomy and I'm coming home. So I had the lumpectomy and my blood pressure went up extremely high. And they were like, I don't know if you're gonna be able to go home, but we have a bed for you. I said, I don't need your bed, because I told my son I'm coming home and I really do need to go home. So do whatever you need to do to get this blood pressure down. So they did. They got my blood pressure down. I went home, and I will never, ever forget this moment. When the car pulled in the garage and he opened the back door to see the car pull in the garage, and I stepped out of that car. His little eyes, I mean, it brings tears to my eyes even thinking about it now, because I told him I was coming back, and it just meant everything to him that I came home that night. So I went through 6 months of chemotherapy. I did a less intrusive package or dose, as they call it, of chemotherapy. And I did go through 6 weeks of radiation. And they were correct. Radiation tired me out. But I can honestly say the Lord's given it all to God.
Yeah.
I don't remember a bad day of chemotherapy. I honestly breezed through my chemotherapy. I really did. Radiation would sit me in the chair from sun up to sunset because I was just tired. But I had a headache before chemotherapy, and they told me to take Tylenol prior to coming in. And I started doing that. And God was just looking out for me, I guess. I did not have a bad day of chemotherapy. I really did not. I was so blessed and so thankful. And so I did the chemotherapy, I did the radiation, and right after that, I jumped both feet into Sisters Network. And that's what I've been doing for the past 21 years.
And we are thankful that you're still doing that, because I feel like you're my twin in terms of diagnosis and everything. We're literally like 3 doors down from one another. But again, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for sharing that beautiful basket of goodies and the Sisters Network deliverables after I was diagnosed. But
You're so welcome.
I think some of you all touched upon this a little bit, but when you were first diagnosed, what did you really want to hear from friends and family after you were diagnosed? Because some people say some strange things, but what do you think would be helpful? And I think, Zelma, you had a very positive response with your friend Rita. I think that was her name.
Rita Ricks.
Yeah.
That's what you want to hear. For me, that's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear, you got this, you got this. It is a bump in the road, but you will get over it. Rely on your faith. That's what I wanted to hear. And after I talked to Rita, like I said, my confidence level just completely changed, and my outlook completely changed, because then I felt like, Rita went through it and she did okay. And that's why it's important for the community to see survivors. So yes. That's why we do what we do, because somebody can look at Dolores and look at Winn and look at me and say, they got through it. Mm-hmm. They survived. Look at them now. So,
Someone even said in the chat, what a beautiful group of conquerors.
So that's what I wanted to hear. You got this. We're here. You need us. We're here, but you got this.
Yeah. And I think that is Zelma. What Zelma has certainly expressed is absolutely what you want to hear. But I also wanted to hear, because again, going back 29 years ago, I wanted to hear that anyone that I didn't know anyone who had breast cancer at the time that I was diagnosed. And then find out later, I was able to find out that several of my church members, women who were older women, had gone through chemo and had breast cancer, and I knew nothing about it, and had been knowing one lady all my life. But I wanted someone to tell me that I would survive. I would live. I had at that time, an 8-year-old and a 13-year-old, an 8-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. And every day I looked at them and I'm like, God, I don't want anyone taking care of my kids. You called me to be the steward over their lives. I need to live. But I wanted them to also tell me that I wasn't being punished for something I had done in my life. I really looked at it initially as, what did I do? What did I do to deserve this? And only to realize that it was not something that I chose, but I was chose for it, so that, and God would eventually give me a platform to help other women who would go through this. But I wanted to understand that this diagnosis did not mean a death sentence. It was not a death sentence. And to me, that was probably, besides all of the encouragement, I mean, I was in church. I had all my life, I had strong women of faith, who were always praying. And so I know that it was nothing but the power of God that got me through it. But, I believe that there was some things that, it's in my head. If I would be here, if I would see my children into adulthood, and I constantly prayed that God would allow that to happen.
Yeah. Powerful story. How about Gwen? How about you, Gwen?
So, I didn't have it in my family. I didn't have cancer on either side. And my parents, my mother lived to be nearly 91. My grandmother, I didn't know anyone in my family who had cancer. And so, you learn when you experience something and you go and you do your research and you learn more about it, then you realize that you were really not knowledgeable about, I don't want to say ignorant, but you were definitely not knowledgeable about things, because I always thought, well, if your family if you have family history of it or something like that, it's a possibility. But there was no connection for me. So it was kind of bewildering initially. It's like, how in the heck did this happen? But I will say that when I did approach it with a sound mind. I developed a system. I was very methodical about it. I it is what it is. So I needed to go about it that way. But I will say that that friends and family just supported me so much. It was amazing to me how much love. I mean, you like to think people like you. You may think you're loved by this person, but when you have something as significant in your life as cancer to happen to you, and back in the day, they called the C word. They didn't even say cancer. Right. So, when you have something like cancer, which is a death sentence, many people believe, and then you have these people coming to your aid and just showering you with all these gifts and love. And it was overwhelming. I gotta say, I was really, really so appreciative of the love and support that I got. I was a little bit reluctant to tell tell my son. I have a son, one son biologically. We have a blended family. And I have a daughter and a son who are a little older than my son. But the son, my biological son, he is a mama's boy, even if he won't admit it. And so I didn't know how he was going to take it. And I actually took my time telling him. I told other people around him, his relatives, aunties and folks, but I didn't really know how I was going to tell him. And when I told him, he was very quiet. And I didn't know how to do that. He was out of town. I was more concerned about how he was reacting to what I had than my dealing with what I was dealing with. But I will say that he stepped up, and he just, I guess he didn't know whether mom was going to be here a day or 100 years, because he came to visit. He was out of town and he was around me all the time. I said, I'm going to be all right. I'm going to survive, Oh, and then of course my husband, I can't even say enough good things about this man. He's wonderful. It was wonderful. But it's just amazing how your life changes, and it does change, and it has changed forever, because I'm an 8-year breast cancer survivor. I've got a mammogram scheduled for October the 22nd. And I'm going to tell you, I'm wonderful for 360 some days. But that day, oh my goodness. I'm just right now thinking about this, but I mean, I'm not saying that I'm worried, because I'm not going to worry, because I'm in God's hands. God's going to take care of me like he did then. But I can't tell you how you feel when you're getting ready to have a mammogram. It's a different feeling, different experience.
So I'm going to throw away my questions now and just ask just two more for you. I guess the first one is, do you feel that you're a better person now than you were before you were diagnosed?
Okay, I'll kick it off. You know what? I'd like to think that I was always a good person, but I will tell you, and I was a believer, but I will tell you that my faith has grown and developed amazingly. I mean, it is all about God in my life. And I really depend on him for everything. But this is, I can't even imagine not having him in my life. So yeah, I'm changed. I'm changed forever. And like I said to you, you still, that you have that you've had a diagnosis that could be life-threatening. You do understand that. You do realize that you have it. And just because I already had it doesn't mean I can't get it again. And so I do believe that it definitely changes your perspective on life. You don't sweat the small stuff, because at the end of the day, it is all small stuff. Okay, it is not godly. The things that I used to think about and worry about and what I think about today are so different. So I've grown and developed, and I'm appreciative of that. And I love the people who are around me, my family, my sister friends, my extended family are so important to me. I don't want to miss an opportunity to say to someone, I love you, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. So that's my mentality right now.
It is definitely life-altering after you've been diagnosed with cancer. I can't imagine people remaining the same after you've been, I guess, diagnosed with such, to me, sometimes a catastrophic experience in your life, and it becomes that. But I think that I have been certainly, I am I would hope, a much better person. Spiritually, the growth has been, pretty extraordinary. Depending on God, listening to hear his words, to get direction from him. And then in terms of how I treat others, even what I'm engaged in, I look at individuals and I want to make sure that whatever I leave them, it's a positive experience. And I want to be meaningful. I'm like Winn, I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. You're not going to hear me. And I try to get other people there, but you're not going to hear me with a lot talking about a bunch of trivial stuff. No, that's not how I operate anymore. And I say to others, my husband, sometimes I have to talk about him a little bit. I'm like, okay, so what is the big deal about, what is the big deal? Because the big things that we have often focused on are so just minute in the scheme of things. Mm-hmm. And so I really try to make life meaningful. The things that I do, I try to make sure they're meaningful. But I think that I try to meet after this experience, that certainly I try to meet people where they are and give them a hand up in the process because of the experience that I've had.
Thank you. Zelma, I'm going to give you the last word here.
Okay, and for me, I can truly say, I just felt like I was chosen. It's 3 girls in my family. My sisters are twins. They're older than I am. And I felt like out of the 3 in the family, I was chosen. I just really feel like that. I feel like God gave me a path. He gave me a platform. He gave me a testimony. And he said, I have work for you to do. And I heard that. I honestly heard that. I have work for you to do. And I just feel like it was my platform. I definitely feel like I am a better person. I do know that I've always been a giving person. My mom used to say, you give the coat off your back. You come home one more day without your sweater or your coat, and I'm gonna beat your tail, because I would give it away. Seriously, if somebody needed a coat or needed a sweater, Lord knows, I would give it away. So I've always been a giving person, but I feel like having this platform has really given me the opportunity to help women. And that's what he wanted me to do. And that's what I do. And I found such a loving group of women and Sisters Network to work with. And something that you guys may not know, I just want to share with you real quick. Before Sisters Network Central Virginia came to Richmond, Virginia, I met with Dolores McQuinn and Cynthia Newbill, because Dolores has been my friend, like I said, since about age 6. And you know, Cynthia Newbill is Dolores's friend and my friend. The 3 of us gathered around a table, and I said, do you think I can do this? Do you think this is something that Richmond needs? Do I have your support? And they said, do it. We got your back. We're here to help you. Do it. And that's when we started the first chapter, Sisters Network Richmond, back in 2001, right after I finished chemo and radiation. And then Sisters Network Central Virginia, 2005. I went to these ladies in confidence and asked, what do you think? Do you think we can do this? So to them, I say thank you. And to all of you that have allowed us to share our mission with you that's on this call, I say thank you, thank you, thank you, and God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you all for sharing your journeys with us tonight. And at this point, I don't think they're going to ask me to be a moderator again, because I went 16 minutes over, but Gwen, I'm going to turn it over to you to close this out.
All right, very good. I'm going to run through this very quickly. I have to say, just wow, this has just been amazing. This whole evening has just all the wonderful information, the wealth of information that's been shared is just, oh my goodness, unbelievable. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, who are VCU Massey Cancer Center and the Sisters Network Central Virginia. I'd also like to thank our expert medical professionals, who are Dr. Susan Hung, Dr. Kandace McGuire, Dr. Tiffany Tucker, Dr. Vanessa Shepard, and our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Robert Winn. Okay, talk about a brother. That's our real brother there. I'd like to thank our sisters who so eloquently told their breast cancer stories. Delegate Dolores McQuinn and Zelma Watkins, the president of the Sisters Network Central Virginia. I'll thank myself, okay. And a special thank you to our effervescent, dynamic moderator, Rudene Mercer Haynes. Woo! Thank you. All of you have contributed to making the discussions this evening so rich and informative. I applaud Dr. Lornell Tompkins, Eukarya Jackson, and the hardworking and dedicated Health and Human Services Facet members for making this event possible. I thank Dr. Danielle Scott and Jasmine Davis, and also Ebony Pike for your technical support. We could not have done it without you. And last but certainly not least, I thank you, the audience, for your support. It's been an honor to be among such accomplished individuals and to be able to present our stories to all of you. Thank you, and wait for it, and good evening. Appreciate it.
Have a good evening. Thank you all.
Thank you.